Hi. Good morning. I think we can, okay, we can start. Let's check if we have people connected. No, to start. Okay, so this morning we will discuss some texts, Greek sources of different nature. So literary texts, theoretical texts, and so on the topic of voice. As you may remember, at least some of you, this seminar follows in the footsteps of many other seminars which were held first in Corfu, as the Gastaldo recalled yesterday, since 2004. And there is this formula of the seminar which remained more or less the same over the years. And this formula includes in the morning a discussion on the main topic, and in the afternoon a sort of free sessions with papers and lectures which are close to the main topic but enlarged where the topic itself. For this reason, the morning discussions are meant to be more in the shape of a seminar than the afternoon lectures. So please feel free to raise your hands and interrupt me in order to add suggestions of your own or ask questions. This is not a formal lecture. I don't mean to do that. It's more kind of a discussion in which all of you are invited to take part, more freely than in a traditional lecture. So let's start with some general remarks on the issue of voice. In Greek experience, especially as far as archaic Greece is concerned, voice is what allows memory and identity to exist. In a culture structured upon orality, there is no other way of bringing about stories, myths, and knowledge. Anything, everything, after the poets have spoken or sung, everything merged into silence and just disappeared. In order for a myth, a story to survive, it needs to be repeated, and each new appearance of the story is kind of a sort of epiphany, and there is no way of saying if the second or third or fourth repetition was the same as the previous one, because in lack of a written storage of knowledge, of a written text, the very same notion of permanence of text is pointless. Not by chance, I believe, does voice play a central, a crucial role in Zeus's policy after his victory over his opponents. One of the most important acts of Zeus is coupling with mnemosyne, thus generating the muses. One generally thinks of the birth of the muses as related to the beauty of song and the origins of poetry, which is certainly true. But there is also a political side to it. If we consider this against the wider context of the other measures taken by the new ruler to secure his newly achieved power, because after obtaining power, Zeus needs to keep it, which is more difficult than winning over the Titans. So what does he do? For example, he eats lettuce in order to keep wisdom inside himself without having to share it with anyone else. He marries Themis, who was the horary, the seasons. But Hesiod construes the name as related to Horao. So in this interpretation, horary are not the season, but they are the watches. And Hesiod names them lawfulness, justice, and peace. So as you can see, every action of Zeus after winning against the Titans as a political meaning. It's about keeping power. And also, Themis generates the fates, so Proto, Lachesis, and Athos, as you know very well. Again, Zeus marries Eurynome, thus generating the graces. Each of these marriages of couplings of Zeus add something to the stability of his reign. But the one with memory, mnemosyne, is crucial to holding the whole thing together. As Hesiod puts it, the muses, I hope you can see, yes, the handout, you have some verses from the beginning of Hesiod's theophany here. And as Hesiod puts it, the muses tell of what is now and what shall be and what was in the past with concordant voice, and that voice flows entirely from their mouths and sweet. It's eusai tadeonta tadessomena proteonta. But their singing is not about giving or spreading joy only. They can decide who is going to be a just and powerful king by granting him a sweet tongue and honeyed words. You see, the power of the muses is to grant the power of persuasion, so they can make a king great or not. Whosoever grants Zeus's daughters favor among the kings that Zeus fosters and turn their eyes upon him at his birth. Upon his tongue they shed sweet dew, and out of his mouth words flow honey. And people's soul look to him as he decides what is to prevail with his straight judgments. So a king is powerful insofar as he can convey his words sweetly and effectively. In a way, this is what the muses do with Zeus himself. By what do they sing in Mount Olympus. They see everything. They see what was in the past, what is now, and what's going to be in the future. And they sing about how he achieved his power, what enemies he has defeated, and what good he did for the other gods and humans. This is in Theophany 43:52. And by singing these actions, these deeds of Zeus, without ever tirelessly and sweetly, they are a sort of living memorial which exists not in space, not like an inscription, like, for example, Augustus's Monumentum Anchiranum. This monument did not exist in space, but in time, as long as the song goes on. So this Hesiod pictures the Song of the Muses as a permanent reminder to both the gods and humans of the greatness of Zeus. And this is a condition for him maintaining his power. I have always found very meaningful that the two predecessors of Zeus, which are Uranus and Kronos, neither of them has anything even remotely comparable to the Muses. So the Muses' action is crucial, is pivotal to the maintaining of power. And this is something we also find in I'm sorry, there is no translation here because I forgot to add the translation, but we can make up for that now. Further light on this aspect of the Muses' activity is shaped by a scene described in a lost piece of poetry by Pindar, which we can reconstruct, or which we can form an idea of thanks to this later writer, Scoricius, from Gaza, Donation 13:1, and this is the picture. After organizing the universe, after turning the chaos into something orderly, so into cosmos, Zeus is at last is at peace, the cosmos is at peace, and Zeus is surrounded by the gods. And the gods stand in front of him, but they don't say anything, they don't speak, they look almost bewildered, embarrassed. So Zeus asks them, why it is so, and if they need anything else. And they reply that the only thing still missing in this recently ordered universe, the only thing still missing is someone able to sing praise to him, to Zeus, and his deeds. There is no God capable of doing this. This is a poet's work. And this is possible just because the Muses exist. And this is precisely what the Muses are for. Actually, I said earlier that before Zeus, there was nothing which could be compared to the Muses. But actually, the world before Zeus is not silent. There are voices even there, but are very different voices. One of them, perhaps the most significant for us, for our discussion, is Typhoeus, this Titan, uh, whose voice is described by Hesiod. Now, this is part of the theology as well, as you can see. Now, when Zeus had driven the Titans out of heaven, this is Martin West translation, the huge earth bore as her youngest child, Typhoeus, being united in intimacy with Tartarus by golden Aphrodite. And what's the peculiar characteristic of Typhoeus? His voice. And there were voices in all these fearsome heads. So this is a many-headed giant, and precisely because he has many heads, has many voices, giving out every kind of indescribable sound. Sometimes they uttered as if for the gods' understanding, so kind of a godly voice. Sometimes again the sound of a bellowing bull, whose might is uncontainable and whose voice is proud. So we move from godly voice to animal noise. Sometimes again of a lion who knows no restraint, so the exhibition of pure force. Sometimes again of a pack of hounds, astonishing to hear. Sometimes again he hissed. Hissing is something characteristic of dragons, for example, so monsters. And long mountains echoed beneath. So this is one of the very few entities before Zeus who has a voice. But this voice is not it's not a single voice. It's not an orderly voice. It's something that changes its aspects. It's oscillating between the extremes of deity and an animal-like voice. And when Zeus defeats Typhoeus by flinging him back into Tartarus with one of his powerful lightning bolts, the new king is now unchallenged on his throne. This is the last enemy that Zeus defeats. And this precisely at this stage, not before, that this nuptial policy begins. He starts marrying or coupling with goddesses immediately after defeating Typhoeus. And in other words, Typhoeus is a kind of a sonic counterpart of the cosmic chaos which Zeus is up against. His victory over Typhoeus is, among other things, is the victory of an orderly voice, the concordant voice of the nine muses, sweet, continuous, homogeneous, in which the past, the present, and the future are connected to each other in a meaningful chain of events, over the bellowing and nonsensical outbursts of a monster. It's clear enough then that the muse's voice marks the beginning of a new era, one which includes humans, unlike previous periods. Indeed, the human music is a gift from Apollo, and the muses themselves are a reflection of the godly music. if you are interested in this reading of Zeus defeating Typhoeus, I can point you to an very interesting article by this scholar, his name is Gosling, and the article is Hesiod's Typhonomaty and the Ordering of Sound, transaction of the American Philological Association, 2010, issue number 140. This is a very interesting article, and for this part of this discussion, I'm indebted to it. Are there questions, remarks, any kind of contribution on the part? Even from home, our friends, if any. Okay, well, I have to. Okay. So let's move now to how some thoughts on how voice works in early Greek poetry. How does this voice sound like? How is it described? How did the Greeks imagine that the voice worked? These are some questions we are going to look into. In general, sounds seem to define any attempt to classify, to pigeonhole it into a set of categories. The sound of voice particularly, is the most difficult item to describe, analyze, and talk about for the obvious reason, which is immediately understandable, that voice is visible, can be seen, can be observed. When it comes to voice, think, and this is true for sound in general, you can't see sound, but when it comes to the voice, things get even harder because unlike other sound sources such as clappers, drums, and musical instruments in general, we can't even see the exact spot where sound is produced and how. If you see someone playing a clapper, I can see the parts of the clapper collide with each other. I can see the fingers moving on the finger holes of a low loss. But with voice, this is not possible. What appears evident from as early as the Homeric poems is that voice is conceived of possessing a body, a materiality of its own, as it were. It can be thrown towards a particular target, as though it were an arrow or a missile. This is probably the meaning behind the well-known expression epe apteroenta, winged words. More importantly, sounds and voices, qua objects traveling from A to B, can collide and interfere with each other. Let us focus on, on some details in the well-known episode of the Sirens in the Odyssey. Of course, I don't need to add anything on this episode, in Book 12 of the Odyssey. The Sirens actions are described as a sort of musical ambush. They wait until the target is within shooting range, as we would say nowadays. Allote tossona peni, o sonte gegone poesas, when we were as far distance as a man can make himself heard when he shouted. So there is a precise strategy, and uh, nowadays this might be as well snipers. They don't shoot until the target is in shooting distance. Uh, While they use the voice as though it were a weapon. One might notice the usage of the verb intuno, Dentunon auriden, verse 182, and intuno, 83, sorry. Intuno is, in other cases, applies to the preparation of equipment meant for a specific purpose. You can intune a horse, chariot, table, or a bed. And after the quotation of the silence words to Ulysses, the expression os pasam ieisai, opa calimon. So they spoke, sending forth their beautiful voice. The verb "iemi" seems to allude to a conception of the voice as something which needs to be thrown at a specific time. Accordingly, to prevent voice from being shut, one needs to block its very source. Which was located in the phalanx as early as Homeric poetry. One might recall the episode of Odysseus and the nurse Euryclea, when he grabs his old nurse by the throat to prevent her from exposing his identity. Autor Odysseus, che rimassa menos Faringos labe dexiterete. Odysseus, feeling for the woman's throat, seized it with his right hand, because you cannot take back the voice until once it has been emitted. So if you want to block voice, you have to act on the origin of the voice, just in the same way as a missile, as a weapon. Otherwise, when the voice is not perceived as well aimed and effective, but is rather observed from outside, so without being involved in the A to B traveling the voice, as something confused and mixed with other equally strong utterances, the final effect will be entirely different. In a well-known passage, yes, it's number 5, from Book 4 of the Iliad, the poet contrasts the Achaeans and the Trojans' ways of going to battle. The former quietly, so that they could hear the general's orders. The latter shouting in a confusion of different tongues and accents, which the poet likens to a flock of sheep, all bleating at the same time. But for the Trojan, even as you stand in thrones past counting in the court of a man of much substance to be milked of the white milk and bleat without ceasing as they near the voices of their lambs, even so arose the clamor of the Trojans throughout the wide coast. For they are not all like speech of one language, but their tongues were mingled and they were a folk of sound from many lines. To underline the lack of direction of their voices, a dehumanizing simile is used here. They are compared to sheep. The ability to reach a specific scopus target is something specific, on the other hand, of the human voice. But let's go back to the silence for a while. In the corresponding episode of the Argonauts saga, so we are talking Apollonius of Rhodes, the Argonautica, Apollonius uses an expression very similar to Homer. Yes, these are some verses from Apollonius, the episode of the silence. Απενεγέως δάρα καητόρις ίεσαν εξ τοματών οπαλαίων, etc. So, and suddenly, to the heroes too, they sent forth from their lips a lily-like voice. So, the element of the ambush is present even in the rereading of this episode by Apollonius. And the relation of Apollonius' narrative to its Homeric model is quite interesting if observed from the point of view of vocal patterns. As is well known, there is a huge difference between the two episodes, I mean the Odyssey and the Argonautica. While Odysseus and his fellow Greeks are aware of the silence, because they have been warned by Lecce, the Argonauts are not. So the Argonauts are caught by surprise. Therefore, unlike Odysseus, they have no strategy in place for this, and they need to improvise. As you know very well, in this situation, it's Orpheus who grabs his guitar and leads the silence voice with it. I am not discussing in detail how Orpheus manages to do so. I mean, musically speaking, some scholars have argued that in this particular episode, Orpheus does not sing at all. He only uses the instrument to produce a kind of almost a noise, a cracked moss, a thick musical barrier, as it were, against the silence voice. What I would like to point your attention to instead is the different physical and perhaps physiological background underlying the two stories, the Homer story and Apollonius story. The Iliad's version implies that sound is either heard or not, which means that if one doesn't want to hear it, his only option is to cover his ears. That's what Odysseus and his fellow Greeks do. Apollonius' narrative, on the other hand, is different, perhaps is subtler, not by chance is Apollonius a Hellenistic. I don't think this is only because Apollonius wants to play with the Homeric model, keeping his balance between tradition and innovation, distancing from the model and following the model. This is the very way in which most of Hellenistic poetry works. But I think there's more. I would like to suggest that the new approach to the mechanics of sound also factors into this way of telling the story. Orpheus' strategy implies two assumptions. First, that a sound can be unheard, as it were, after being heard. If there is another sound strong enough to fight it off from the listener's ears. Second, that it takes some time, albeit short, but it takes some time for a sound to kick in, to take effect in someone's ears. It's hard to resist the temptation of linking these differences to the philosopher's interest in sense perception, particularly hearing from Plato through Aristotle to the Hellenistic philosophers. Interest which Apollonius, who was notoriously a very learned poet, must have been aware. So the sounds of the silent voices starts entering the Argonaut's ears, but there's still time for Orpheus to kick it off from these ears, because the sense perception of hearing is something that builds up in time. It takes time for the ear to be filled by sound, which is totally different from the sense of sight, for example, which in the ancient conception is instantaneous, because they didn't know, of course, that even light has its own speed, but they couldn't possibly know that. But they had experienced the notion of the speed of sound, which is more easily observed. Another relevant example of this materiality, this physical body of the voice is a voice that fights off other voices is to be found in one of the Iliad's many battle scenes. In particular, I'm referring to this episode from Book 8. The context is that the Trojans are pushing back the Achaeans all the way to their fence and are about to reach their ships, which, as you know, are on the beach, and they are about to set fire to the Achaeans' ships. So it's a very difficult moment, it's a tough moment for the Achaeans. Then Agamemnon steps in and delivers what we nowadays would call a short and effective motivational speech, as it were. So he went as well on the huts and ships of the Achaeans, bearing this great purple cloak in his stout hand, and took his stand by Odysseus' black ship, huge of hull, that was in the midst, so that a shout could reach to either end, both to the huts of Aegeus, son of Telamon, and to those of Achilles. From these had drawn up the shaky ships at the farthermost ends, trusting in their valor and the strength of their hands. So they uttered here a piercing shout. The Greek is Eusende diaprusion, etc. So Eusende diaprusion, calling aloud to the Danaans. So Argives, base things of shame, felt, and was only whither are gone our boastings, when forsooth we declared that we were bravest, saying that each man would stand to face in battle 100, 200 Trojans, whereas now can we match not even one, this Hector that soon will burn our ships with blazing fire. So this is not a single shot. This is a short speech. I cut it, but there is an invocation to this. So there are many words, many verses. It's not just a shot. What is relevant here from our point of view is Agamemnon's strategy to be heard from both ends of the Greek camp. After sinking high ground on Odysseus' ship, which happens to be in the very middle of the area he wants to cover, he uses his voice in such a way as to reach as far as possible. The term for that is a very interesting adverb, this diaplusion, which literally means going through, piercing. Its value can be further illustrated by means of another Homeric passage. So I'm kind of Homeronex-Homerosapeism here. The only one in which our adverb is not used in relation to sound. In the furious battle over Patroclus' dead body, the two Ajaxes lift the corpse and shield it from the repeated attacks of the Trojans, and there is a simile here. It's book 17, like a wooded bridge that lies across a plain will check the cruel currents of swollen rivers, turning them back to spread over the plain, and the floods, though strong, never break through. In this way, the two Ajaxes were holding off the enemy. Okay, this is the only case, the only occurrence of this adverb in the Homeric poems, which is not directly related to sound. But nonetheless, yet, precisely because it's not about sound, it sheds light on the previous one. One can easily imagine what a sonic inferno a battle was. In the Iliad, we read several descriptions of this inferno. Suffice here to remember in book 4 of the Iliad, this is not Iliad aloud because it's just one verse. Etc. There were an exultation of men being slain, and of those slain, as the earth ran with blood. So the battle was a total chaos. It was a mixture of different sounds coming from everywhere. And yet, Agamemnon's voice cuts through this turmoil, deviates the competing sounds just in the same way as a hill or a ridge holds off a river or a stream and forces it to take a different course. We can appreciate here how the sound of the voice, although invisible, is by no means thought of something immaterial. Instead, it possesses a bodily mass with which it occupies the space. This is consistent with the usage of such expressions as mega or megala and macron or macra, with reference to the loudness of vocal patterns in Homeric poems and in general in early Greek poetry. There is a book which is still seminal, still fundamental of these matters. Of course, many of you already know it. It's was been written, I think, in the 70s. It must be 1977, something like that. And this might kind of characterization of sounds in early Greek poetry. Other questions, suggestions, objections, something that you want to add?
Maybe I can ask something.
Oh yes, please.
So, I'm interested in how much of this, because we're speaking about the power of voice and of sound in general, perhaps. How much of this power actually comes from the language and the content which is said, and how much of the way it is being delivered. So how much, because we are speaking not only about the voice, but of the content that the voice is a medium of.
Yes, that's very true. And
so the dynamics is interesting.
Yes, I guess that as powerful as words may be, they have no power at all if they can be heard. So the very first thing is to ensure that your voice reaches its target. And then, of course, once voice as pure sound has performed its duty, which is to reach the target, at that point, of course, the meaning of the words and the persuasive power of the words as a message, okay? At that point, these factors in, but the preliminary condition for words, any kind of word or speech or rhetorical construction, to be effective, the precondition is that people should be able to hear it. So I think it's a combination of the two. Voice, so just vocal utterance, should be powerful, and of course the words, once they reach the ear, the words must be powerful too, because otherwise you would have a shout without meaning, and in the other case you would have a beautiful speech but too weak to be heard, I guess.
I see just in the first passage you mentioned, Hesiod theory, that there are in just 3 lines 3 different terms to indicate the voice. Line 39 you have phone, and then aude, and 41 you have ops.
Yeah.
Since I'm going to talk of these terms in Aristophanes this afternoon, I want to ask you if you have seen any difference or peculiarity of these terms, or they are just used as equal as in this passage where they all refer to the voice of the users.
Well, in this kind of situation, I haven't looked into this specifically, and I always wonder if the the necessity of constructing the verse and the inevitable tribute to be paid to formularity factors into this. So I wouldn't be too specific into distinguishing necessary differences of meaning. I guess that when verse 39, the poet says "Phone and reusai," which the translator Martin West translates in unison, voice in unison. These might refer to very physical and musical side of phone. which is consistent with speaking of unison, of course. But and when he talks about the flowing of the voice, which is sweet and comes out of the mouths without ever tiring, this must be a more related to what they are saying about. But this is just, no, I guess I will push it too far because I'm aware that there is a technique here in constructing the West. So I think we should be cautious in proposing semantic differences, unless there are contextual and textual reasons to do so. If we are able to observe a recurring association of a given term with a specific allusion to content, now I think we are allowed to be legitimate to propose this kind of besides, thank you for bringing this up, because in these verses we can see that the God's voice is, as it always often happens, an idealization of what the human voice is not. Because we all know that even the best singer with the best singing technique in the world, sooner or later dies and is not able to sing anymore. But big goddesses sing always. They never stop singing. It is, if we take the words of Hesiod at face value, we should assume that the muses never stop. And it's kind of as if their song was the background sound, the background radiation, as it were, of the Olympic world and of the universe itself. Please, Angela.
No, thank you, Simone, for this question, and also to Massimo for the answer. I was, in fact, noticing that maybe it's my impression, I don't want to see ghosts where they are not, but my impression is that these three terms, the use of terminology is very neat, is very precise in the accentuation of, first of all, in the phoneme, what can be, what comes out of the mouth, and then what can be perceived from the voice in the ears of the audience, and it's that ops is very poetic way which can be associated also with singing and also the voice of the gods.
And of the silence, if I remember, yes.
Yes, so I think that it's very specific, the use is very specific in order to pose the accent on the nuances of the voice in this case. And I think it's worth to go deeper in this use of terminology. I think it's like the author wants to pose, give the impression to the audience to give a specific terminology that can be perceived by them, I think.
Thank you, but it definitely makes sense, I guess. Three different voice as the moment in which it's emitted, so it's a song phenomenon, and the way in which it is received, and its poetical beauty, which would be the third one, ops. That's very interesting. Thank you.
But maybe it's what to see. It's what the effort to see how is the
It definitely is.
Yes,
Yes, it
but that's
is.
important.
Thank you, thank you. Choosing, if you agree, we should think of a little break. Yeah, I don't want to take advantage. You strain your attention. It's just maybe a little coffee. Yeah. Okay. Okay. It's a nice place, Bello Nuovo. let's go to the final part of this morning's discussion. I think I'll go on for about half an hour, and then we can finish and resume tomorrow morning. And we were talking about the characteristics of voice as we can see them in the Greek poems. And in Homer, we find many references to the quantitative and qualitative aspects to the voice. I mean, to its loudness and also pleasantness to the ears. An example is Nestor's voice, which is as sweet as honey in Iliad 1, verse 249, but we find very little or nothing at all on how voice is produced. So the mechanism of formation. To be honest, the poet of the Iliad seems to be aware of the role of the windpipe in the process of formation. It's worth noticing that when a warrior is killed by a hit to the throat, the Greek has either lymos or, more rarely, stomachos. On the other hand, there is this famous passage, you can see, in which Achilles hits Hector in the neck, but his spear misses the windpipe, thus allowing Hector to speak, to utter a few words before dying. In this passage, the poet distinguishes between laukanie, which appears to indicate generally the neck, or more specifically the esophagus, and asparagus, which is probably to identify the windpipe. But there was an opening where the collarbones part the neck and shoulders, even the gullet, where destruction of life comes most speedily. This is Marley's translation, so it's quite an old-fashioned English. Even there, as he rushed upon him, goodly Achilles let the drive with his spear, and clean out through tender neck went the point. Howbeit the ashen spear, heavy with bronze, played not the windpipe, to the end that he might yet make answer and speak unto his foe. So we have laukanie here, which is the neck, and the anatomic part, which is spared by the heat, asparagus. This is an elementary detail, an elementary anatomy of how phonatory apparatus was taught to work. Another feature of the human voice, of which the epic poet seemed to be aware, is its intrinsic fragility, especially if compared to the muse's voice. In the address to the goddesses that precedes the so-called catalogue of ships, so in Book 2 of the Iliad, the poet claims that he would never list all the captains and peoples of the Achaean army, not even if he had 10 tongues, 10 mouths, and a voice that never broke. Tell me now, the muses that have dwellings on Olympus, and so on. I could not tell nor nay, for not though their tongues were mine and their mouths, and a voice unwearying, and though the heart within me were of bronze, did not the muses of Olympus, daughter of Zeus, that beareth the aegis, call to my mind, and all them that came beneath Eros. Here there is a double fragility, I guess. The fragility of memory, because but for the help from the muses, the poet would never be able to remember all those names of people and commanders, and the fragility of the voice. Phone, arrectos, is exactly what the poet wishes his voice were. Thus, the point implies that his own voice, qua human voice, is prone to the risk of breaking, whereas absolute stability and tiredness are hardly achievable to human beings, as trained as they may be, and belong to gods only. And as we have seen earlier, the voice of Hesiod's muses flows akamatos, which means indeed without being without any form of tiredness. Okay, so now let's start quite slightly different approach, and let's see how does voice work. What is voice in the thought of philosophers and so on. As is well known, ancient thinkers were aware that voice occupies a special place in the world of sounds, and human voice in particular. Let's see a fundamental text of voice, which is this part of the Anima by Aristotle and so on. And Aristotle, for instance, makes it clear that for a sound to be called voice, three conditions should be met. One, that the source is a living being, the animal. Two, that this sound comes from the organ that is meant to produce, i.e. the larynx. And number three, that this sound must be intentional. Let's read what Aristotle says. Voice is a sound made by an animate being, sotos tis estin and psuku. No inanimate thing is vocal, though it may by analogy be said to be vocal, and as in the case of the pipe, the lyre, and all other inanimate things that have pitch and tune and articulation. From these qualities, it would seem the voice also possesses. Then, voice is sound made by an animal and not by any part of its body indifferently. But as in every case of sound, there is something that strikes, sound is struck, and a medium, which is air, it is reasonable that only creatures which inhale air should have voice. This is very important because in this vision, in this conception of voice, voice is produced by a specific kind of mechanism in which there is a thing which strikes, so a striker, something which is struck, and there needs to be a medium. This three partition of the agents which produce sound will be the model for virtually any successive account of sound in general and voice in particular, all the way to Ptolemy, which we find this distinction between topleton, the striker, topletonon, the thing struck, and to dihu eblege, so the means through which the initial impact flows. Another important remark here is that we can speak of voice with reference to musical instruments only by analogy, since instruments happen to possess pitch. So these qualities are originally belong to the voice. Pitch, tune, melody, and dialectos. The first two terms are quite easy to explain. By pitch, we all know what is meant. And also melos. Melos is a succession of different pitches in time, so we can call it melody. It's a little different about dialectos, because dialectos here, for example, Hicks, the author of this translation, renders with articulation. Dialectos is what distinguishes language and other voices which are not language, for example, animal voices. But when it comes to musical instrument, we are told that even musical instruments possess dialectos. And in this sense, dialectos might be perhaps the ability to articulate sounds in such a way as to make rhythm perceptible and evident. The dialectos in musical instrument might be the same as the articulation of consonant in spoken language. Because when we speak, our voice is generally thought to be in vowels. Even nowadays, when people study how to sing, they are taught that when we sing, we actually sing vowels. So if the substance of the voice lies in vowels, what are we to do with consonants? Consonants are in such a way, especially the explosive ones, explosive consonants, are a way of articulating vowels. So since musical instruments have this can do that, because when I play the voce, I can play legato, I can play staccato, I can articulate sounds. When I play lyre, lyre virtually has no legato, but every and each note is plucked, so it's a kind of plain staccato. It can be more or less stressed, but every single note has to be plucked, has to be staccato in some way. So perhaps the philosopher was referring to this when he said that musical instruments have dialectos. Otherwise, one could also think of the narrative capacity of melody and the different scales that can be used to compose a melody, and dialectos might also refer to that. There are different interpretations of this. However, although voice is not only the first and most immediate musical instrument, but also the most relevant sound source in the so-called human soundscape, the reflection on how sound works does not appear to start from the voice. The first observations, the first reflection on how sound is produced do not originate from the field of voice. The feature of sound, most importantly pitch, are observed in other senses, such as bronze discs, pipes, and strings, and are put in relationship with such characteristics as the length of pipes and strings, the diameter of discs, and so on. This is probably because, as trivial as it may seem, the voice cannot be seen. The mechanism of the production of voice cannot be seen. So, there seems to be a tendency to extend these observations, which are carried out in other fields and on other sound sources, to the voice, in a sort of path from what is artificial, the instrument, or instruments, to what is natural, the voice. An example of this can be found in the well-known fragment of Archidas on the, I don't know if this is in the Annals, I don't think so, but anyway. On the utility, as you know, one of the most important fragments of Archidas of Tarentum is about the utility of studying the mathemata, so sciences, in the edition of Karl Hoffmann is fragment 1. And Archidas connects, and this is very well known, higher pitch of sounds with greater force and swiftness in the impact. So, for Archidas, every sound is the result of an impact, something that collides with something else. And this he calls, in his dialect, plaga, which is plague in and so he connects greater force and swiftness of this impact with higher pitch. And of course, on the contrary, lower pitch with weakness in the impact and slowness in the impact. And here is what Archidas says about the voice. And yeah, I don't think you have this. Yes, here it is. Okay. So, and in order to show how this works, Archidas uses different kind of examples with different sound sources, and among these, voice as well. So, there is this general statement. Well, then, of the sound, this is Karl Hoffmann's translation, of the sounds reaching our perception, those which arrive quickly and strongly from impacts appear high in pitch. Please, I point your attention to this oxea finitae, which is very important. This is, for us, this is the beginning of ancient acoustics. There was no separate branch of knowledge labeled as acoustic in Greek science, nor in Greek philosophy. We can speak of ancient Greek acoustics just by analogy with our acoustics, but they do not conceive of acoustic as something independent from harmonic science and the study of music theory in general. But anyway, this finite is quite important because it states a very basic concept that pitch has little to do with sound as physical phenomenon. Pitch is something we perceive. So it's pointless to speak of pitch if not with reference with the subject who perceives sound. Actually, without the subject perceiving it, there is no sound at all. There is just a kind of a vibration in an elastic medium. And this was very clear to the Greek thought from actually the beginning. So, but those which rise slowly and weakly seem to be seen to be low in pitch. For if someone should pick up a stick and move it sluggishly and weakly, he will make a low sound with his blow, but if quickly and strongly high, and then it comes to voice. Not only by this would be recognized, but also whenever either speaking or singing, we wish to voice something loud and high, since we speak with a violent breath. I think two points should be underlined in this statement of Archimedes. One is that he is very careful to mention both speaking and singing. This might seem something quite obvious, but actually it's not, because it is as if Archimedes wanted to underline that voice can be used basically in two ways, speaking and singing. We should remember that Archimedes lived in Tarentum. And Tarentum is also the birthplace of Aristoxenus. Aristoxenus is known, among other things, for having described the difference between the two ways in which voice is used. This is a very famous passage of his main work, main extant work, the Elementa Harmonica. I just mentioned it. I know that you remember perfectly what Aristotle says, but just for the sake of clarity, let's remember that Aristotle distinguishes the speaking voice, which he defines as phone logike or phone synekes. And this is a way of speaking in which we do not separate the different pitches between one another. Right now I'm speaking, and if we were able to to arrest, to stop my voice at a definite point, that point would have its own pitch. There is no doubt. But this pitch changes so quickly and without any seamlessly, okay, that the listener doesn't focus on the pitch, but on the flowing of my words. And this is the phone synekes. Otherwise, if I sing, at least in that particular kind of singing, which was deemed beautiful and worth of name of art by the Greeks, different pitches are separated in such a way that the listener can understand, okay, this is one note, and then there is another note, tonus 1, tonus 2, tonus 3, and each tonus has a clear beginning and a clear end, and then I go to another pitch and my voice stays there and then moves on to another pitch. This classification of the two movements of the voice is universally attributed to Aristotle. any textbook, any book on ancient music theory will tell you that this is the Aristotelian theory. But where did Aristotle take this idea from? As you know, Aristotle begins his career as a philosopher, as a musician, historian, and music theorist in a Pythagorean environment, which is Tarentum. And then he leaves Tarentum, and then he becomes a disciple of Aristotle. His main innovation in the field of music theory is often said to be the rejection of a Pythagorean approach to music theory. Aristotle is the one who introduces the possibility of splitting an entire tone, a 9 divided by 8 tone into halves, which is an impossibility in Pythagorean terms. So, Aristotle is considered the one who rejected all the mathematical apparatus, the rational paraphernalia of Pythagorean theory, and the one who claimed that music should be studied in its own terms, which are not rational in sense of in the meaning mathematical. In this sense, Aristotle has been portrayed as the first true musicologist in Western history. There is a very famous book by Sophie Gibson, Aristotle of Tarentum and the Birth of Musicology. And of course, this is all true. But how much of this Pythagorean background remained in Aristotle's theory? And for our purposes, most importantly, is Aristotle really the author of this difference between one kind of movement of voice and the other one? If we read this fragment of Archidas, we might think that Aristotle actually built his thought upon Archidas' thought. Because before Aristotle, Archidas is very careful in dividing, in saying legotes and aegotes. And his goal is to show that whether we are speaking or we are singing, if we want to utter our voice more loudly, we must exert more strength. We need a high amount of force. This stage of ancient acoustics is still a little bit, not perfectly accurate, insofar as it doesn't distinguish between pitch and volume. Because as you can see, you have what is high must be loud, and what is low must be weak. This model does not include the possibility that a voice is high and weak, or that is low and powerful. This is not yet, this was introduced by the Aristotelian school. In this moment, we don't have still this passage. But anyway, here, a clear connection is made, even in the field of voice, between the kind of emission and strength. But further, this also happens just as with whispers. Those which are strongly are carried far, those little near, for to those moving vigorously the air yields more, and to those moving quickly less. The same thing, and it touches upon voice again. The same thing will also happen with vocal sound. The one carried by a strong breath will turn out to be loud and high. The one by a weak one, soft and low. There is another, as you may know, this fragment is quoted by Porphyry. Our only source for this fragment of Archidas is Porphyry in his commentary on Ptolemy's Harmonics. Of course, the quotation is larger than this. I only pasted here, pasted here the bachelor text I was interested in for my purpose. But a few lines after these, there is a moment in which Porphyry summarizes what Archidas says. He shifts from a verbatim quotation to a kind of, resume of what Archidas says. And he says, after saying that the movement of phoneme is intervallic, diastematic, Archidas goes on saying this and that. Okay. This is, in my view, this is a very important remark. It's a very quick remark, it's just one line. But it's very important because if we are to trust Porphyry, we should conclude that even before Aristoxenus, Archidas had introduced this kind of classification. So, Archidas or his predecessors, because in this fragment, Archidas is not presenting these ideas as his own ideas. He is quoting hoi peri ta mathemata. So, those thinkers who are concerned with sciences. So, this might be even pre-existing. These ideas might pre-exist Archidas, might predate Archidas. So, in Tarentum, in the 1st century BC, before Aristoxenus, perhaps before Aristoxenus was born, because you may remember that Aristoxenus' father was a friend of Archidas. Maybe thinkers had already developed a distinction between two different movements of the voice. The interval one and the speaking, the indistinct, the continuous one. Okay. One might think that this view, Archidas' view, is limited to the earlier phase of ancient acoustics, and that it was to be replaced by a more accurate distinction between pitch and volume, which is true to a certain extent, but we also find a connection between force and pitch, even in a later source, namely Theophrastus in fragment 716 in William Fortenbaugh's edition, but this connection between force, strength, and pitch is a very different one. In Theophrastus' account, it's not the force itself that which increases or diminishes in emitting higher or lower sounds, but the distribution of that force within the body. Let's see what Theophrastus says. Again, if one were to utter a high note while touching one's ribs, and then a low note, one would feel the movement about one's ribs more with the hand in the case of the low note. So here we have a connection with force, but it's a very different one, because in the old model, the model of Archimedes and his disciples or his predecessors, a high note was necessary, would necessarily require more strength, and vice versa. Here, we are told that there is a constant amount of force, which does not change with reference to pitch of the note we want to sing. This strength simply changes its direction, because if we are to sing a low note, we will direct this force towards our rib cage. And on the other hand, if we want to sing a high note, this force will be directed toward our throat. This remark is, in my view, is quite an interesting one, because it implies much more attention to the act of singing and to the art of singing. It implies that the singer reflects on the very way in which he or she emits, gives off the sound. And this is, in some way, this is very modern as well, because even nowadays, when speaking of the art of singing, in singing lesson, when speaking about operatic singing, but also other kind of genre, pop singing and so on, we know that what we call chest voice, head voice, throat voice, and so on, actually indicates not the part of the body in which the voice originates, because that doesn't change. That is the vocal cords and the larynx. There is no way that we can sing or speak without using our larynx, without using our vocal cords. What changes is our own perception of the areas of our body which resonate more or less with the note we are singing, or with the words we are speaking. Because also speaking, we can decide to use our lower part of the body resonance or our head resonance as well. So even the act of touching one's chest while singing implies a totally new level of attention towards the dynamics of the production of voice. If we think that with Theophrastus we are on the verge, on the threshold of the Hellenistic period, we have seen yesterday with the beautiful paper by Sivan, that perhaps the Hellenistic period is the period in which the people are more attracted, more fascinated by the act of singing, because there is the rise of professionalism. So they are no longer amateurs singing symposiums. They are people who want to go to the Odeon, to the theater, to listen to the famous singer, and this is the period in which the musical divi are born. The protagonism of excellent. I remember a beautiful chapter by Chianotis in the book on music in the Hellenism, about this cult of great singers in Hellenism. So this attention to how to produce sound might be quite a characteristic of this time, which is the passage between the late classical period to the Hellenistic period, this new interest in voice. As you may have noticed so far, Archaicus' and Theophrastus' account are both non-quantitative, because there is no attempt at measuring this force. We are in the field of more, less. Nobody is talking about ratios, numbers. There's no such thing. So we are in the area of qualitative approach, not quantitative. Meaning that they do not apply the theory of Pythagorean ratios to the pitch variation in vocal melody. Actually, Theophrastus' assumption is that music has nothing to do with numbers. However, other theorists attempted to extend to the voice the rational assumption, which was much more clearly observable in some instruments. The most relevant example, in my opinion, is provided by Ptolemy in his Moments. Ptolemy tries to answer a very important question about the singing voice, which is, how is our voice able to grasp the right intervals? Because if we think that music intervals exist as mathematical entities, as ratios, so they are this kind of rational necessity, which is very Pythagorean way of thinking. The question arises how our body is able, because the voice is something belonging to the body, how is our body able to translate this mathematical entity into something physical? How can the soul instruct our vocal organs to reproduce the proportion which underlie the octave, the fifth, the fourth, and all the other magnitudes we need to master in order to sing melody properly? A sort of translation is needed here. For the soul operates in the realm of intellect and pure reason, nous, whereas the voice has to deal with the body and its limitations. To answer the question, Ptolemy has no other choice than picturing the phonatory apparatus as though it were something familiar to his readers, something they would see in their everyday lives. So he comes up with an ingenious comparison between the windpipe and the aulos. And here it is. For the windpipe, it's like a sort of natural aulos, different in only this one respect, that in auloi, the location of the striker remains constant, because when I play the aulos, the striker is the mouthpiece where the vibration happens. So the striker doesn't move. While that of the thin struck shifts closer or to or farther from the striker, because when I play the aulos, I close and open the finger holes. So the thin struck is to be intended as the last closed finger hole. Okay, so the thin struck moves back and forth through the pipe, but the striker stays where it is by the device of finger holes. Whereas in windpipes, so in our body, it is the other way around. The location of the thin struck remaining constant, because for him, the thin struck is the point in which our internal air leaves our body and goes in the external space. While that of the striker is the point where the sound is born, the striker shifts closer to or farther from the thin struck, as our ruling principle with their inborn music. So music is something we have which is intrinsic to us. find and grasp marvelously and easily in the manner of a bridge. This is a very important remark. The place on the windpipe from which the distances to the outside air will produce differences of sounds in proportion to the amounts by which the distances exceed one another, which is a very complicated way to say that we have eaten a monochord, because a bridge is the movable bridge of the Pythagorean monochord. So he is thinking that when we sing, the point in which the air leaves our body and it goes in the external air remain in the same place, so it's fixed. But what moves is something here along my windpipe, which goes as if there was a monochord here, up and down, and this this bridge is able to position itself according to Pythagorean ratios in order to produce the right notes. Anatomically speaking, this is utter nonsense, because, of course, my larynx is here, it doesn't move. I can't think my vocal cords moving up and down my windpipe. This is nonsense. But it was a very effective way, from a theoretical standpoint, to represent the production of pitches and intervals in singing in a way that an orthodox Pythagorean could easily understand. And with this beautiful image of something with a monochord stuck in his windpipe, I will stop for today. And are there remarks, questions, anything? If they are not, we could know it's something not monochord. Something different. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for you.
Yeah.
This beautiful lesson that you
Thank
gave us.
you. Thank you.